All right, let's talk about something that is, well, it's pretty much everywhere, and yet somehow it's still a huge source of confusion for so many of us: sex. We're all constantly swimming in a sea of mixed messages. On one hand, we see sex used to sell everything from cars to cheeseburgers, but on the other, we're taught to be ashamed or confused about our own desires. So, what gives? How do we even begin to sort through this modern paradox? Let's get into it.
I mean, this quote from the source material for today's explainer just nails it, right? So much noise, so little clarity. It perfectly captures that feeling of whiplash. Sex is celebrated and glamorized on every screen you look at, but at the same time, there's this quiet, powerful pressure telling us exactly what's normal, what's okay, and what's not. And, living in that contradiction creates a ton of anxiety and confusion. And here's that conflict, laid out plain and simple. What we see is sex as a public commodity, a marketing tool. But what we're told, often in much quieter ways, is that if your own personal sexuality doesn't fit into a very specific, pre-approved box, then it's a problem. Something weird, something to be ashamed of, maybe even something that needs to be fixed. It's the ultimate cultural double standard. So the real question is, why? Why is society so at war with itself over sex?
Okay, so that brings us to section 1, society's war on sex. To really get our heads around this whole paradox, we've got to dig into the roots of it. Why does society even feel this deep-seated need to control and repress sexuality in the first place? Well, one of the core ideas here is something called terror management theory. And yeah, it sounds pretty intense, but the concept is actually pretty straightforward. Deep down, at a primal level, a culture's number one job is to survive. It's obsessed with continuing the group. So anything that seems to threaten that, like, say, sex that isn't about making more babies, gets instinctively flagged as dangerous. And what do we do with dangerous things? We control them. It's like a massive subconscious defense mechanism for the whole of society.
What's really fascinating is how the gatekeepers of this control have basically just changed their uniforms over the centuries. As you can see here, way back when, it was the priests. They defined certain sexual acts as immoral or sinful. Then, around the 1800s, the judges took over. The same acts went from being immoral to being criminal. And then, in the 20th century, the white coats came in, the doctors and psychiatrists. Suddenly, what was criminal became pathological. The labels changed, but the fundamental goal of control, that stayed exactly the same.
So how do these systems keep everyone in line? Well, they do it with myths, really powerful myths that we all kind of absorb without even realizing it. The source we're diving into today zeroes in on these 5 big ones. These are like the pillars holding up all that sexual shame and conformity. So for the rest of this explainer, let's put these myths under the microscope and see what the actual science has to say. All right, section 2. Let's talk about the biological truth. If so many of society's rules are built on these myths, then what's actually going on inside of us? What does modern research, biology, psychology, what does it all tell us about how we're really wired?
And this brings us right back to that first myth and to the age-old question, right? Nature versus nurture. When it comes to who we are sexually, who we're drawn to, is that a choice? Is it something we learn from the world around us? Or is it something deeper, something fundamental we're just born with?
Well, science gives us some pretty mind-blowing clues. Take a look at this. These are studies on identical twins, people who share 100% of their DNA. Now, in the general population, only about 2 to 3% of people identify as gay. But if one identical twin is gay, the chance that their twin is also gay skyrockets to around 50%. That is a massive jump, and it points to a really strong genetic component. But it also raises a fascinating question. If it's all in the genes, why isn't it 100%?
And it's not just about orientation. Our core personality traits, the things that make you, you, are also heavily influenced by our genes. And these traits are super connected to how we express ourselves sexually. Just look at this. Openness to experience is over 50% genetic. And the source material makes this really interesting connection. That particular trait is highly correlated with an interest in things like BDSM. So it's like our genetics are handing us this incredibly detailed blueprint for who we are sexually. So that's the answer to the why not 100% question. It's not a simple case of nature or nurture. The truth is, it's nature and nurture. And the science that explains this is called epigenetics. The easiest way to think about it is that your genes are like a giant sound mixing board. The board itself, your DNA, is fixed. But your life, your experiences, your environment, they can slide the faders up and down, turning certain genes on or off. So your core sexuality is largely built in, but its final expression is shaped by this amazing, complex dance with your life. Okay, now this slide, this one might really surprise you. It takes a huge, common myth and just shatters it with cold, hard data. The myth is that pornography, especially violent porn, fuels real-world sex crimes. It's a persistent fear. But the research, looking at decades of data across multiple countries, shows the exact opposite. In every single country they've studied, as legal porn becomes more available, rates of sex crimes consistently go down. It suggests it may act more as an outlet, not a catalyst. And to put the final nail in the coffin of that first big myth, let's just look at this number: 0. That is the number of legitimate, controlled, scientific studies that have ever shown that so-called conversion therapy actually works. 0. Despite decades of people trying to prove it, there is no concrete evidence that you can change a person's fundamental sexual orientation. It's an innate trait, not a learned behavior you can just unlearn. Okay, so we've torn down the myths, we've looked at the science, now what? What do we actually do with all this information? That brings us to our final section: reclaiming your authentic self. This is all about taking these ideas from theory and putting them into practice in our own lives. First things first, it's crucial to get that this kind of change isn't like flipping a light switch. It's a journey, a process. The source material uses this really well-established psychological model, the stages of change, to map it out, and it's super helpful. It's about figuring out where you are right now. Are you in pre-contemplation, maybe not even aware there's a conflict? Or contemplation, where you know there's a problem but you feel stuck? Or are you in preparation, getting ready to act? Knowing your stage isn't about judgment, it's about seeing what your very next step could be. And what's the whole point of that journey? What's the destination? I think this quote from a client in the source material just says it all. I want to feel free. I want to feel sexy. I want to have the confidence to go out and initiate the kinds of experiences I want. I mean, listen to that. That's the universal human desire at the heart of all this. It's not about being deviant. It's about freedom, confidence, and the right to pursue your own joy. That's the goal. So here's a super practical tool for fighting back against the anxiety that holds so many of us back. So often, we get stuck in what's called outcome-oriented thinking. We're in our heads, right? Worrying about performance, about getting to the finish line, about whether we're doing it right. And that just creates this vicious cycle of fear. The key is to shift to process-oriented thinking. Instead of worrying about the result, you focus on the process, the sensations, the connection, what's happening in your body right now. That shift breaks the anxiety cycle because it brings you out of your head and back into the moment. And to help you make that shift, the source offers this incredibly powerful but simple exercise. You just take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle. On one side, you write down all the negative stuff you learned about sex, all those learned beliefs. Sex is dirty. My desires are weird. On the other side, you write down what you truly want, your true desires. I want to feel free. I want to feel sexy. Just seeing them side by side like this, it makes it crystal clear how much of our anxiety is just external baggage we've been carrying around. It helps you separate society's voice from your own. So when you boil it all down, what we've seen today is that for most of us, the story we have about our own sexuality is a story that was written for us, by culture, by history, by religion, by commerce. But the actual science, the biological truth, tells us that our real nature is far more diverse, resilient, and beautiful than those old stories ever allowed. So I'll leave you with a final thought, a final question. Your sexual story has been written by society. Are you ready to pick up the pen?